This is Gala Avery reporting to you about this week at the Video Archive Cinema Club, the 20-seat secret cinema located within the Vista. Today, I am joined on the airwaves by Video Archive Cinema Club manager Matt Landsman and special guest Roger Avary to chat about the calendar for the week of Monday, January 20th. Hey, Matt. Hey, Roger.
Hey, Gala.
Hey, Gala.
So let's talk about this month's calendar design because last time that we talked about December's calendar, we spoke about Matt and my idea for the black calendar, which I think personally turned out amazing. And then Matt and I kind of talked about doing January as a white calendar to signify kind of the new slate of the new year. But there was something even more special that Matt managed to do with the calendar. So, Matt, why don't you take it away?
It is on white starburst paper. If you look very closely, and this may or may not come across in pictures that you see online of the calendar, but it definitely comes across in person, there are little multicolored bits of funfetti to celebrate the new year all through the white space of the calendar. So I think it's just a nice little added touch and a way to ring in 2025.
I
How do you find
agree.
paper like that?
Well, it was actually one of the options at the printer that we normally go with to do all of our calendars and the New Beverly calendars. So I just thought it was a fun way to change things up a little bit.
I agree, and I also just like hope there's more funfetti in the future. I don't know how often they have this kind of paper, but when
Is
I
that literally
saw,
the name of the paper, Funfetti?
No, it's I think it's like Starburst or Starblast or something like that.
Starblast. That's
funfetti is
awesome.
like the name of a cake when you put sprinkles in it. That's like what I wish that I could be eating all the time. So that's like what I like to refer to anything that has like confetti in it because it's not just confetti, it's funfetti. But this calendar also, I think, Matt, you did a really good job of highlighting the dark spaces and the light spaces, and especially that the Carpenter double feature just stands out on the calendar so much with the Eyes of Laura Mars and In the Mouth of Madness
That
You
was
should
tricky.
you should call this like the silver nitrate version.
of the
Because
calendar. Yeah, silver nitrate. That's funny.
It was hard to integrate those two images because they're both pretty dark posters, and the Mouth of Madness poster is like a pretty murky design. So that was definitely a fun square to come up with.
Yeah, and I recall you telling me a little bit about the Night Visitor Square.
Oh, well, we'll talk about the Night Visitor in a little bit here, but I will tell you guys that that tape image. Uh, Retake. I will tell you guys that the image on that square is actually scanned directly off of the tape from Quentin's collection, which was originally in the Eddie Brandt's collection. So I basically took the tape that we are going to play and took a high res photo of it and then really cleaned it up.
it's an amazing graphic. It's like almost German expressionism.
I know, and it's very painterly compared to kind of the rest of the calendar, which, as we mentioned last episode, has so many different kind of decades. So you have so many different styles.
Yes, and we will get more into the Night Visitor soon, but I will say that the graphic of Max von Sydow as Salem on that calendar square is a little deceptive of how he actually appears in the movie, in the sense that he's wearing a black cloak as opposed to tidy whities.
As he runs through the rooftops. But as Matt said, we're going to get into it later. Roger, when you're looking at the calendar, Matt and I kind of talked last episode about the movie that, like the singular showtime that kind of stood out to us on this calendar. Do you have one in particular that stands out to you?
Well, I have to say the fact that nearly all of the what do you call it, days, the calendar days, are all white, except the one in the very, very center, like a target, and that's Eyes of Laura Mars and In the Mouth of Madness, which you guys were just talking about. But the fact that that is literally almost dead center, as if this were a cross, this would be the crux of the cross. And so my eye, and it's called Eyes, and so it's like my eyes are just immediately drawn into it. And so yeah, that was the one that hit me the most. As far as this week, if I were to just look at this week on the calendar that we're talking about, gosh, I mean that night visitor graphic that you put together, Matt, is it's just fantastic. This is great. Him with the axe. I know I know it is a little different than the movie, that it comes across a little different, but it looks great. It looks really cool.
Yeah, I love how that one turned out. And I will say it was also like, how do you represent Looker and Coma? Because the Looker poster is so iconic. You don't want to go with like alt art for Looker. You got to get those TVs on it, basically.
Well, it's kind
So
of cool
that was
because
tough.
coma is almost hanging in the subconscious of Looker, which is kind of neat. It's almost like that guy's like literally strung up, hanging there from Looker.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's get on into this week at the Cinema Club. To start us off for the week, we have Tuesday, January 21st at 2 p.m. We have Crime Wave, directed by Sam Raimi.
So this is a movie that I first became aware of actually thanks to our mutual friend Mick Garris, who once mentioned it on his show, and I was intrigued because I was like, "Oh, here's a Sam Raimi movie that was written by the Coen brothers along with Sam Raimi and has Bruce Campbell in it," and I had never heard of it. And as I looked into the movie, I found out that it was sort of considered to be this black sheep in Raimi's filmography, in which he was, from what I have read, very, very dissatisfied with the sort of interference with the production that the studio had. I know that Rob Tappert was really dissatisfied with the experience. Bruce Campbell said that the movie escaped, it didn't get released in the traditional sense. And pretty much everyone involved in this movie, from editing to post production to fighting with Embassy Pictures, they hated it, and they said it almost ended Raimi's career making this movie. But I'm here to tell you that it's actually kind of fun, and it's sort of like a live action cartoon. It's like a madcap dose of zaniness in the vein of Evil Dead, almost, with some of that just kind of wild and wacky energy. And tonally, it's like almost like something like Ghostbusters or Arachnophobia or something like that. There is a lot of pretty funny stuff going on in this movie. Roger, you're familiar with this one too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say for me, it's like a Looney Tunes cartoon. I mean, Raimi has always had a kind of almost animator's mind, like the kind of images that he was coming up with. I mean, I was first introduced to Raimi at the very, very first screening of Evil Dead in Los Angeles at Filmex, and the movie was like a midnight movie. It played at a midnight screening, and Bruce Campbell was in attendance, and Lance had gotten us all tickets to go to Filmex, and one of the movies was Evil Dead, and on the poster of, and I actually have the Filmex catalog, that the program that has it, is like, the Evil Dead creature, like, ah! And okay, I had never seen anything quite like that, in a movie, and no one had any idea what to expect. And what we were given was a kind of absolute, like in a horror way, a kind of Looney Tunes cartoon version of a horror movie. This kind of vision, of from all of them, not just from Raimi, but also from Bruce Campbell and everybody involved. And Campbell was there, and the audience completely did not get the movie. The audience completely did not connect, and there was a lot of snarky comments from the when people were asking questions. But Bruce Campbell described that he would always be doing what he called a fake shemp. That sometimes you had to have this kind of fake shemp, which was um, like a replacement, for another person. And so there's a lot of Three Stooges in what they do also. Well, I hadn't seen Crime Wave because in the jump to Evil Dead 2, it's like we almost didn't even know that Crime Wave had happened, except that it came out on VHS and we had it at the store. And Jerry Martinez, who was one of the guys there, told me, "Oh, you've got to check out Crime Wave," and we popped it on. And so that was the first way I watched Crime Wave, was while working, standing at Video Archives, watching this absolutely insane vision. And like the scene that pops out to me, there's two elements to this movie. A lot of people, including Raimi and Bob Tappert and those guys, they have their maybe misgivings about the movie, but the brilliance of the minds behind it and the commitment of the performers behind it really truly comes through despite the kind of mess that it is. There is a chase, I think, with Byron James chasing, or lead through the, and I haven't seen the movie in many, many years, but it's still extremely vivid to me from that first screening, through that door factory. And like, that is something out of an animated cartoon. And it's almost like an operatic thing, and you can watch it just for the joy of that. And any movie that has that alone is, to me, like worth watching. And then you have Bruce Campbell scenes, and his, I think his character's name is Ronaldo, and like this kind of smarmy dude. He is so on fire, in those scenes. Okay, any movie that had that, I would be into. So I absolutely kind of love Crime Wave, even though I don't revisit it a lot. And to hear that it's kind of this black sheep, or that it's considered a black sheep, I get it, I understand, but at the same time, it's almost like a diamond that just got all smashed and cut up a little bit, or dinked or something along the process, but you can still see the diamond there. It's like this amazing thing.
Yeah, those sets really are fantastic, like you said. I mean, that chase scene through the doors is like straight out of Chuck Jones, and
Yeah, Chuck
then
Jones, totally
they
Chuck Jones.
they have like that wacky like Dumb and Dumber-esque like exterminator vehicle that they're driving around with the giant rat on top of them, and then it's the two guys who are like the two bad guys, and one of them is Brian James, who plays Leon the replicant in Blade Runner, and the other one is Paul L. Smith, who plays Bluto in Altman's Popeye. And I think like they almost sound like Muppets the way they're speaking, and they're just like driving around, and there's this crazy windstorm in LA, and there's like bullets whizzing past. It's so sensational and so weird, and the performances really set it apart. And Louise Lasser, who's like the main woman in this, she's really fun, and she was the mom in Blood Rage, which we showed a couple months ago.
This is the exact kind of movie that is supposed to play at the cinema club, because if it is this kind of long forgotten gem, or this movie that is the black sheep, this is the kind of stuff that we want to highlight here. Here is a
Yeah,
director that you
it's
know
got
his
some rough
stuff
edges.
already.
No,
It
it's
has
got
rough
some rough
edges for
edges,
sure,
no
but
doubt.
here's a director that you know and you can recognize from popular titles. And of course, like at the cinema club, like you could play Evil Dead,
Well, not only
but
that, but
here's Crime Wave.
Raimi was around. Like, Raimi and the Coen brothers and all those guys came from the same place, and they all kind of migrated into movie making at the same time. And they're using the same crews and cinematographers, and there's like these things are happening at kind of all at the same time. And so there's this continuity between these artists, in this moment. And so you can watch Crime Wave and get a bead on things from what is effectively an artist who is on freaking fire, I think. And sometimes that makes something that's a little crazy. And to me, I can compare it to maybe Egon Schiele and Gustav Klimt. Gustav Klimt was making very buyable, very pleasant versions of essentially what Egon Schiele was doing, like as a wild man off on the side, and making these things were rough on the edges and wild expressions, and so Crime Wave kind of exists as um, this, I mean, what he was doing in this time, and his kind of wild experimentation, and the failure of it is probably in some ways a dialing in of it, more than anything. We can see how he responds to it, as a way to see his development.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good marriage of the styles of the Coen brothers and that like madcap Raimi energy too. You can kind of feel that like plot complexity of like the heist and the kidnapping and stuff like that that you find in a lot of like early Coen work as well. So I think that if you're a fan of either of those artists, it's definitely one to check out. And by the way, at the time of this recording, it's almost sold out. So if you want to see a live action cartoon with people getting electrocuted, thrown out of windows, hit by cars, etc., and not dying as the result of that, you should definitely get those tickets.
Yeah, for sure. If it's a low ticket alert, you guys know a lot of stuff sold out really quickly this month. We do have a sold out show later in the week, which we will be highlighting and telling you about. And there is even a sold out show next week. So if anything on this calendar tickles your fancy, make sure that you head on over and get your tickets now. But remember, if anything is sold out, there is always a standby line.
Yeah, be there or be square.
Now let's talk about Wednesday, the 22nd at 2 p.m. We have The Night Visitor. Okay, guys, just to give you, the listeners, a little bit of a background information on this movie. We were supposed to cover this on Video Archives, but it actually never made it to the mic because when we went to record, it was between talking about The Night Visitor and Julia. And Quentin chose for us to cover Julia as our third movie. And Roger and I both were wishing that we had eventually gotten to cover The Night Visitor, but it never happened. And so Roger did talk about it on the Pearson podcast at one point. But here we are. It has been programmed, and we are here to talk about The Night Visitor.
Yeah, I mean, what a movie this is. Like, I don't even know where to begin. Matt, why don't you begin, actually?
Well, it begins with the great Max von Sydow running through the snow in his underwear, trudging up a hill like something out of Aguirre, the Wrath of God. And he breaks into a house and strangles a girl who I believe is his sister. And we find out that he has escaped from an asylum, but the doctor who witnessed the murder, who says he saw him escape, no one believes this doctor because Max von Sydow, his character name is Salem, is so thoroughly entrenched in this asylum that it's like Alcatraz or something. It's like this snowy fort that it would be impossible for anyone to break out of. So it becomes a mystery where the audience knows that he's the one that is getting out of the asylum and like committing murders, but all the other characters sort of start blaming each other, and their trust for each other begins to crumble away. And I found that it almost kind of was really hitting its stride in these almost like Hannibal Lecter type moments where Salem is sitting in his cell playing chess against the other inmates, and he's just sort of playing everyone in the movie for a fool. And of course, then we see how he's climbing out of his cell with this
And
like
that's one of the greatest moments ever when they finally reveal how he escapes from his cell. Oh my gosh, the journey that he goes on over those rooftops full
he,
of
he's
snow.
he's like climbing out of this pit with a rope with his like knobby old man legs, just like scaling these buildings. I was so like distracted but taken with his like outfit choice in this movie because it's just not like what you imagine like a
Well,
killer.
it shows the level of commitment he is willing to go through at any moment, and it also shows that his both his resilience, because he's doing all of this stuff in like extreme cold conditions, one, his resilience, but also his absolute dedication to attaining the sweet revenge that he is seeking. And it is, he's basically playing a hero who's doing a kind of like crazy act, and it's just it's a fantastic performance in a
It's
fantastic
also
film.
solid. It's a solid movie from beginning to end, and it has this great thing of like exactly why is he trying to enact revenge, and why is he willing to go to these lengths to do it? And it's just you're right. The dedication that Max von Sydow has to actually do this movie and do these crazy stunts where he's like climbing with his knobby knees. This director, Laszlo Benedek, it's a Swedish film, even though this movie is in English. And I think it's going to play really well with a daytime crowd.
Yeah, it really feels like a Swedish movie too, like in a kind of bleak,
Yeah, it has that kind of art house
moon-like,
feel.
ice scape almost, where it's just fantastic.
It's such a dark movie from the first frame. It's almost like gothic horror, like in the asylums, like this, like castle almost. And what's interesting in contrast to that sort of gothic horror vibe is I was surprised to see that Henry Mancini was the composer for this one, who I normally associate with like much more sort of plucky, upbeat sort of music. But I really enjoyed this one, and this is one that Gala told me about, in advance, and I was pretty delighted with it, and I don't know why. I just thought it was a matinee sort of movie.
So, if anyone wants to come and see this movie again, it is playing on Wednesday, January 22nd at 2 p.m. And if you know me, 222 is good luck. So, I think you should come and see The Night Visitor. Okay, now on to our first evening show of the week. We have Thursday, January 23rd at 7:30 p.m. We have a classic film double feature. It's Rio with Co-Hit, The Kiss Before the Mirror.
And this is our Universal Noir double feature. These are both Universal titles from their classic sort of pre-code catalog, or at least the Kiss Before the Mirror is pre-code, and we really wanted to showcase more Universal titles from that era.
So I'll start us off because when I saw the title for Rio, I was very intrigued because my dad was in Rio de Janeiro at the time. And I was like, oh my God, it's a Brazilian story. I should check it out. And this is directed by John Brom, and it stars Basil Rathbone and Victor McLaughlin and Sigrid Gurry. And it's basically about this diabolical French capitalist named Paul, who's played by Basil, who is forced to leave his bride of 1 year when he's arrested for crimes of forgery and embezzlement, and he's sent to a penal colony off the coast of South America. And I'm just going to start this out by like the first 15 minutes. He is so nasty in like a slick, slimy kind of way because he has embezzled all of this money from all of these investors and he just does not care. He's like, yeah, I embezzled, but like, let me go out to dinner one last time and like, let me do all these things. And he's married his wife and they've only been together for a year. But once he kind of gets taken away, she vows to remain faithful to him. And she's kind of like a singer, dance hall girl, and the mob is that he's embroiled with, and I don't really know if you'd call it a mob, but I would. These kind of rough gangster types that he's been embezzling for are taking care of his wife. But as
Wait,
she's
is this in Rio de Janeiro
yes,
that
and
this
it
is
takes
happening?
place in Rio de Janeiro. So like
So it's
he's been
like a
sent to a
Rio
penal
de Janeiro
colony.
gang, and he's like in some kind of prison off of Rio de
Yes,
Janeiro.
he's off the coast of Rio de Janeiro,
Okay,
and
I know
she's
where that
still
there's one island with the lighthouse on it, which is probably where that would be if it were real. Like,
it
I
might be
guess.
that one then. It might have been used for that, but she's still in Rio and she's singing the clubs. And one night, this another fellow, Dirk, played by Victor McLaughlin, comes into the bar and he is like piss drunk. And he accidentally, I think, like throws a pie at her or something weird like that, and it hits her, but he didn't mean to hit her. And so he's carted out of the bar in a really kind of aggressive manner. And he just wants to go back in and apologize to her, but the bar people won't let him. And eventually he stumbles into her house. He like stalks her and stumbles into her house to apologize and passes out. And when he comes to, he thinks that he's slept with her. And so he's trying to sneak away. And she eventually is like, no, come and have tea with me. We didn't sleep together. Don't worry. I'm not in love with you. I'm actually married. And it turns out that he's not just a drunk, but he is an engineer that's kind of down on his luck because a bridge that he built collapsed. And he holds the pain and suffering of all these people. And the story then unfolds from there, where even though she is loyal to her slimy, slick husband, she is slowly falling in love with Dirk as he sobers up and helps the people of Rio de Janeiro build this kind of like water aqueduct system so that the villagers can get clean water.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it's needed.
it's needed in Rio. And it's actually a really tender, loving romance where you find yourself kind of torn between like, does she stay with her husband of 1 year that has been embezzling and kind of being a slime ball, or does she go with this guy who's cleaning up his act? And it's a tragic story. And if you know me, I don't like cheaters. And in movies, typically when someone is married, I always want them to stay with their husband. But in this case, I'm not so sure. It's a gray area. And so it had me really thinking about these morals that they're suggesting to you. And the movie is in beautiful black and white. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And especially with this co-hit, The Kiss Before the Mirror.
And this is also sort of our Eddie Brant's double feature with this one. These are both tapes from the Eddie Brant's collection, and those typically mean that they are not in quite as good condition as the Video Archives tapes. But I'm sure, Roger, you remember Eddie Brant's back when it was operational, right?
Well, yeah, I mean the tapes there may be some funky transfers and rough tapes, or they may have experienced a lot of use because Eddie Brant's was, I mean, one of the, if not the premier, I mean, I would have considered it in that part of town the absolute premier. It was one of the standards that was, keeping us constantly trying to rise to that level. And their collection is, exquisite. And I mean, it is part of the collection. So it's not. I don't believe we have these tapes in the archives collection.
Yeah, now that
So
Quentin has, kind of purchased all of Eddie Brandt's that was there, because there are Eddie Brandt's tapes floating here and there every now and then. You'll find one in the wild, but Quentin does have the majority of the collection. So they have been folded in to the archives collection. And we do on the main show actually watch Eddie Brandt's tapes as well. So it's all just one big happy family now,
yeah,
even
it
though they
is
were
now.
two
It's all
different
part of
stores.
the Tarantino collection.
Yes, and Matt, I know that you're going to kind of highlight a little bit about what The Kiss Before the Mirror is about because it's not available for streaming. So I was not able to check this one out. And so I think for anyone who really likes this kind of noir, you're going to want to go to the cinema club to see it.
Well, another reason that we're showing this movie is because we love the great director James Whale, who we actually showed our first ever, I believe, 16 millimeter print in the Cinema Club. Was one of James Whale's movies, and that is The Man in the Iron Mask, which I know Quentin is a huge fan of, and it played so well at the Cinema Club, and I became such a big fan of that movie. And of course, I knew James Whale. Everyone knows James Whale from Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein and The Old Dark House and The
And
Invisible
The
Man.
Invisible Man. Yeah. And you guys
But
also showed Remember Last Night, didn't you, at the
yes, we
cinema
showed
club? Yes.
Remember Last Night, in which he sort of even makes a joke, multiple jokes in that movie about not wanting to do horror. So The Kiss Before the Mirror, which is sort of a courtroom drama almost, but a highly stylized courtroom drama, was done in the midst of his horror filmmaking. And at around that time, he had turned down doing Dracula's Daughter and even made jokes about Dracula's Daughter in Remember Last Night. So it, we're loving that we're showing so much James Whale. And this one, of course, was shot by the great Carl Freund, who was a really, really talented cinematographer of his time. And they said that he was one of the pioneers of the unchained camera, which basically just means a camera that moves, which back then, and when he started shooting stuff and when he directed The Mummy, the original Boris Karloff Mummy, it was not common for the camera to move much at that time. So, The Kiss Before the Mirror is a book or it's a play adaptation rather, and it's about a doctor who murders his wife. He's sort of a celebrity doctor, and then he's defended by a sympathetic attorney, a good friend of his who thinks that his own wife is having an affair. And I gotta say that the thing that really, really stood out about this movie is Frank Morgan's performance. And Frank Morgan plays the Wizard of Oz famously in the original Wizard of Oz. And he's the lawyer. And the speech on the trial, when the lawyer is defending his client, is so passionate and so amazing. And talk about Freud cinematography. The way it's panning around the courtroom to everyone on the jury and everyone's expressions as he's defending his friend. It's one of the most convincing courtroom speeches I've ever heard. And it was very, very moving. And of course, it's effective because he's coming at this case like defending his best friend with this great empathy uh because his friend killed his wife for adultery, yeah, but he has this great sympathy because he thinks his own wife is having an affair. And this is a really short, easily digestible movie. It's barely over an hour long. You'd be doing yourself a disservice not to just see that great cinematography, see great performances from Paul Lucas and Gloria Stewart, and of course Frank Morgan. And this is actually a Carl Laemmle Jr. production, who is pretty much the architect of the Universal monsters. So it's cool to see them doing something in that era, in the time frame of Universal monsters, that was not exactly of that same canon. And Whale remade it himself. Within 10 years after that, he made a movie on Wives Under Suspicion, starring Warren William, and that is basically an adaptation of The Kiss Before the Mirror. So if you love this movie and you love this story, check that one out too.
You know what? A chained camera is effectively chained by gravity, and cameras in those days were as large as like an engine for a Chevy Suburban or something. They were giant, and so when you wanted to move the camera, you really had to be motivated to do it. To do so. And when a lot of these guys were cranking out movies pretty fast because of the studio system, and so whenever you move the camera, that's also time. that you're eating into, and so it was very infrequent. And it was only because Whale is such an organized filmmaker in his head that he was probably able to balance the time and the the desire to move the camera cinematically to achieve what he wanted to achieve.
Yeah, it really it feels almost like Night of the Hunter or something, where it has this like expressionist power of the silent era. And I believe Carl Freund, the cinematographer of this film, was also the cinematographer of Fritz Lang's
Yep,
Metropolis.
he was a
So
German. Yeah.
he was one of the greats of that
Hmm.
time. So very very moving the way this film was shot. And again, this is another Eddie Brandt's tape, and Gala will share pictures of the boxes in the newsletter. But I think it's interesting how they are sort of like these very homemade looking boxes. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. When
Yeah,
Freund
all of they
began,
are.
they built the sets around the camera, not the other way around.
So again, this is a classic Universal film black and white double feature with Rio and Kohit, The Kiss Before the Mirror. If you're interested in seeing these two flicks, make sure to go get your tickets. This is playing on January 23rd at 7:30 p.m.
It sounds like it's time for a snack break.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
And we are back from the lobby with our snacks. And as you guys all know the news, unfortunately, David Lynch passed away last week. He is a lot of people's favorite director. And today, during our snack break, we kind of mentioning what he means to us and also a snack that you could get at Pam's that would be something that we think that David Lynch would like.
So, as I understand it, David Lynch loved cherry pie and pie in general, and it seems like he also loved cookies and sweets. And a friend of mine who used to babysit for him said that he loved the chocolate croissants at Starbucks as well. So he loved all kinds of sweet things, and we knew that he loved the milkshakes at Bob's Big Boy in Burbank as well. But one thing that Lynch was really, really known for is his love of a damn fine cup of coffee. And I had to honor him on the day of his passing with a damn fine cup of Black Pam's coffee and a slice of cherry pie. And I just wanted to say that I took a film uh, summer camp class back before I really was looking at film through an analytic lens. And they showed us the scene out of context from Mulholland Drive, in which the guy describes his dream to a friend, in which he sees the terrifying bum character out the back of the Winky's diner, and then his friend tells him there's nothing out there, and they go out there, and the viewer is filled with this continuous sense of dread, as we know that he's going to see something horrifying as he goes out there, and then he does, and he quite literally dies of fright. And that not only cemented in me the power of horror cinema and was just an amazing setup and payoff of a scene, but it sent me down a rabbit hole of watching Mulholland Drive and then watching Lynch's other films and trying to understand them and trying to understand what they meant. And of course, he would never concretely reveal the answers to these things because, as Ridley Scott put it so aptly, the filmmaker reserves the right to pose questions without providing the answer. But I didn't realize it at the time, but Lynch was spurring me into my first foray in film analysis. I had never thought critically about films. I had never examined what they meant to me or taken them deeper than a surface level. And I really don't think I'd be here today without just that curiosity that he provided me with, and just uh, the depth that his films left me thinking about. He leaves behind an enormous crater for so many people. His art was just unmatched, and he was a true visionary, and there will never be another like him. And it really just felt like we all just like felt this devastating loss all at once. So I really, I really admired him.
Yeah, we had a lot of outpour of people on the chat room. We just made our cinema club chat. So anyone who's listening, if you want to talk about the episodes or the movies that are being discussed, head on over to the patreon.com/video archives, because we had an outpouring of people discussing David Lynch, what his movies meant to them, which movie was their favorite, which one they would want to check out. And it was just really touching to see everyone kind of come together and discuss a director that is so beloved by people, and even the people that did not find his movies to be their favorites, because it's okay not to, still were there with a very supportive camaraderie for their fellow cinephiles in discussing the titles about him.
I kind of think that there actually will be others like him. There's actually many others like him, but there's none others that are him. Is more, I think, the point. And what it means to be the kind of artist he is, which was something of a surrealist, I think, is he had this ability to look inward and to see things completely liberated from, in a way, with a free mind. He was able to see into, I mean, the ether, we can say, and to interpret and to pull all of that out. And I remember he described several things. One, on that masterclass thing, he described going fishing when he did his creative process and not knowing what was under the surface of the water, which was the into the subconscious under the water. And he would go sit on the dock and he would throw a line out, and it would go down, and he would wait and wait and wait and just hope that an idea would bite, that a fish would bite. And then he would pull it out from underneath the water and out of the surface. And sometimes the fish is too small and you have to release it back in. And other times you get a big whopper. And so Lynch was like amazing like that he was able to look into his subconscious mind. And that was a realm that was only him. And that can never be repeated, I guess, for anyone, but especially for him, and because of his abilities. So one thing about him is that you wonder, where does something come from? And a lot of it is reflections of life through all of this. And I was involved in a lawsuit once with a very large corporation. I had this attorney who was the most intense, strong, powerful attorney, and he represented a lot of really good people. And one of the people that he represented was David Lynch. And he told me a story about him. And I actually never met David Lynch. I've never known David Lynch. I know that Eli Roth,
Yeah,
he
was
worked
very,
for,
very close.
he
He was
was
like an
so
assistant.
close
Yeah.
to him. He was like worked at his side for years, and so he truly knows him. I do not know David Lynch. What I have is a story about him that was told to me by my attorney, who was also his attorney. And what happened was, there was this French company called CB DuMille, which was owned by a guy named Bouygues, who was a construction company, right? This was a massive French construction company. They're like, we build Leal, we build this, we build that. They build the giant projects in France. It was like one of the biggest construction companies in the world. And at one point he said, I love movies. And I love movies so much that I'm going to give contracts. I'm going to create a company called CB DuMille, and I'm going to basically give contracts, open tickets, to make 3 movies, to give filmmakers 3 movies, and I'll make 3 movies for them, and he'll pay for it. And like, I think Bertolucci was one, and David Lynch was one of them. And he had this 3-picture deal of movies of a certain budget that he could make. And he made 2 of them. And the time came to make the 3rd one, and Bouygues died. And so when he died, the guys from his construction company, they just looked at the film company and they were like, what the fuck is this? Kill all those contracts, forget all of that. And they basically told David Lynch, you can't make your next movie. Well, it turned into a lawsuit. And David Lynch, was seeking damages because he was supposed to be making this movie for him. He had been guaranteed by contract. which in France is kind of a big deal. But these guys were fighting it, and they were fighting it like construction guys, right? And so they hired an attorney who to do all the depositions with David Lynch. And this guy, apparently, as described to me by George, was a phantom attorney. Like they couldn't get any information about the guy. He was this French dude, or Swiss or something, and he was just like this really super gnarly French attorney. And he came in, and in these depositions, he started working on David Lynch, and he started attacking David Lynch, and he started going at him. And the whole thing was, you are incapable of making a movie that's a linear film, that's a linear story. You don't even know how to make a movie. And that was the basis for their wanting to cancel the contract, was that they were saying, you don't know how to make a movie. And he had to suffer through these depositions, these horrible, and I've been in depositions myself, it's soul draining. And for a guy like David Lynch, who is an artist, one of the greatest artists, to be subjected to this like brutal attack, like just bludgeoning by this wicked, evil attorney guy, as it was described to me by another attorney who himself was a tough guy, and so David Lynch was broken down by this, and in this thing that you cannot make a linear film. Well, they went before the French courts, and the judge was a woman. And everybody comes forward and they stand there before, and they're like about to do the trial. And she just leans forward and she says, I just want to say before we begin, I adore the films of David Lynch. And he won. And the next movie he made was The Straight Story. And that's how the power of life can sometimes affect you. That he made his most linear film that is literally the most linear thing. It's a guy driving on a road. Just like that's what the movie is. And it's, I think, maybe his most powerful film.
Oh my gosh, A Straight Story is terrific. I mean, the culmination of the movie with Richard Farnsworth and Harry Dean Stanton finally reuniting, and him looking at the sort of tractor and being like, you came to see me in that? Oh my gosh, it gets me every time.
It is perhaps the greatest example of taking a beating and rising out of it and making art. It's great. It's powerful.
I'm overwhelmed by this story. I've heard it countless of times from my dad, but every single time it rocks me to my core because it's such a special story. And I know we've had lots of listeners and people that are viewers at the Cinema Club writing in to say, please play some David Lynch in his honor. So hopefully we'll see a few more David Lynch titles.
Program The Straight Story
in the coming months. Roger's vote is The Straight Story. I know David Chien also loves The Straight Story. I'm going to give you a shout out, David, because when we were all talking in the Patreon chat about what titles that we all really love, David was like, I hope everyone who loves David Lynch goes ahead and watches The Straight Story because it's one of his best movies and an underseen title.
Well, he showed that guy. He does know how to make a linear story.
Yeah, he does. That he does. So getting back to the titles that are playing this week at the Cinema Club, we have Friday the 24th at 7:30 p.m., Comanche Station. And you guys, I'm so excited for this title. Everyone should know.
Because you're the Bud Buttaker fan. You're the biggest Bud Buttaker fan.
Well, I might be the second biggest Bud Buttaker fan because the other one is Jules McLean. Both she and I love Bud Buttaker. So I am so excited that we are showing one of his titles at the Cinema Club. And I think this is like actually, in my opinion, the perfect introduction title to Bud Buttaker if you've never seen one of his films. He is like a classic, I would consider him a Western director, even though his early filmography was kind of like noir, and he has a shark movie, which I wonder if my friend who loves sharks has seen, called The Killer Shark, and he has a Musketeer movie. So kind of in the same way that Mario Bava has his like barbarian films and other things of that, he does have a variety of genre, but later in his career, he is known for these Western movies that have Randolph Scott in them. Specifically 7 Men From Now, The Tall T, Decision at Sundown, Bushnell Rides Alone, Ride Lonesome, and Comanche Station. And Comanche Station is kind of the last one in those titles. But I think it's the perfect introductory one. It's about a man that trades with the Comanche all the time, and he trades them for the release of a female prisoner. and he kind of is just like trading with them, and he sees that they have a white woman, and he's like, I'm gonna get her also. And so he frees her from her captivity, and as they are going across the Wild West together, three outlaws who have had their eyes on this reward for bringing this woman home. And so Randolph Scott's character has to protect the woman from the Comanche and from these outlaws who just want to take her for money and probably do all sorts of nasty things to her also in the process. And through the story, which is one of my favorite things about a Bud Butterker Western, because Randolph Scott is kind of like an older gentleman at this time, is that it is not a romance story between him and the leading lady. And you uncover the reason exactly why he is saving all of these women, why he is saving this woman and many other women from Comanche warriors as time goes on. And it is such a like loving, harrowing tale about just like true love between my favorite genre, one of my favorite subgenres is men who love their wives. And it's like, I mean, Mad Max is in that, like for sure.
Yeah, for sure, for
Harrison
sure.
Ford's Frantic. I'm not Harrison Ford,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
from
well, like
his
he's
yeah,
upset. Like,
obsessed with his wife.
yeah,
I added another movie to that title the other day. I wonder if I can find which one it was.
The
But
Addams Family, Raul
yeah,
Julia.
yeah, he
that's
loves
true.
his. It's like men who love their wives, and it's just like I love this subgenre. And Comanche Station falls within that, even though you never ever meet his wife in the movie. And I am just so struck by a love story that can persist through the screen without even meeting one of the characters. The yearning, the longing, the Wild West. It's everything I want in a movie. And guess what? I'm pretty sure that it's only like 90 minutes, 74 minutes. It's 74 minutes. You can get on in at 7:30, watch a 74-minute movie, get on out in time for dinner.
You
It's
can
just, it's a perfect date night.
you can giddy up to
Yeah,
Comanche Station. And I have to say, this is a sort of home recorded tape from Quentin's collection. And it has this incredibly charming, like, Western roundup, like, TV graphic at the start of the recording, in which like you see these like film reels bouncing across the screen as like wagon wheels, and there's like a little cowboy like riding these film reels across the screen. That was so charming, and you will get to see that if you go and see the movie in the theater. And also, uh, many of our listeners loved checking out all the different versions of the spoilers back in December, and Randolph Scott, of course, plays the villain opposite John Wayne in the 1942 version of the spoilers.
yes, and also I wonder if Julie is actually the one who recorded that tape for Quentin, because when we covered the Planet of the Apes TV series, I believe she was the one who had recorded that tape for him. So it might be kind of a cool kismet. I'll have to ask her and see if she is the one behind this tape. But it's just going to be a really great show. I think it's the perfect date night movie. It's also just the perfect movie to go to by yourself, just to have a personal date night. I do that all the time. So if you want to see a Bud Butterker movie, whether you are a longtime fan of him or you've never heard of him and you just want to check it out, whether you love Westerns or you've never seen one, this is the perfect time to kind of get your feet wet into the genre. So Friday the 24th, 7:30 p.m., it's Comanche Station.
And that brings us to our final and most popular show of the week, or at least first to sell out. And that is our Michael Crichton tribute double feature on Saturday, the 25th. And that begins with Light Ocular Oriented Kinetic Emotive Responses, aka Looker, starring the great Albert Finney.
Yeah. Is this called Crichton Knocked?
Crichton knocked.
Well,
It should be. I
we
think
have
on the
shown Westworld in the past, and we're big fans of Crichton, obviously, so we wanted to keep it going.
Well, if Crichton Knocked begins with Looker, and then moves into Coma, that's a great night because Looker is actually my favorite of his films. When I saw it when it first came out in theaters, I was familiar with him, as a writer. I actually still have the first edition of Andromeda Strain, and so I had known
ugh, ugh. Ugh.
I,
Like I'm having intense like flashbacks.
well, and that's the movie that's giving you those intense flashbacks, which is probably wise, and that monkey and all of that.
Oh my god.
But Crichton's book, which is almost like it's composed almost like how Dracula was written, in how it was written in letters and correspondence, and as if it was a real documents pulled together as a novel. His is pulled together like all these elements and missives, government missives, and stuff like that, and it's all sort of collaged together to feel very real, like you're experiencing this thing. So he was like totally on everybody's radar, I think. And then when he started directing after Westworld, like is a lock for every kid back then. Westworld was, and Yul Brynner, and like all of it was just so amazing. Like it was just so fantastic that when it came to Looker, I'm not sure how the movie was received, but how I remember how I received it, and I feel like I liked this movie at the time better than anybody else I knew, or better than the press that I was reading.
Okay,
And
so Dad, I have to say this because you had always told me about this movie, and when I was in Dallas, I picked up a tape for, well, actually, Chris over at There Are Too Many Movies picked me up a tape for 50 cents because he haggled for them. And so when I saw it, I think I texted you, and I was like, how was this movie received? Because this is one of the greatest science fiction movies ever made, and if this came out today, like right now, this would be a smash hit. Like it was so oversaturated with science fiction at the time that I think this was kind of fell through the cracks.
well, we were sort of we had luxury of riches almost at the time, because Hollywood was like really cranking them out in that moment. This was the 80s, and everything was kind of early 80s. Cinema, I think, was exploding. Quentin frequently talks about it like that it was sort of a slightly dead period, and it does have its characteristics that are reflective of the time period. But I still think that what film artists were doing at the time, especially auteurs who are both, I mean, he's more than just a writer director. He's a writer director, and he's sort of an author. Literally, he's an author, and he's at this point producing. And he's I think Crichton is fantastic in this film, and the invention of the ideas that were in it, and its discussion of advertising was so far thinking that we're only just now starting to see
The ramifications of it. I mean,
yeah
we've discussed like who Crichton is a little bit, and I mean, if you've heard Video Archives podcast, you'll have heard our episode on Coma, and if you listen to my show, you'll have heard my 2024 roundup where Roger and I mentioned it. But if you haven't heard those, let me just give you a little brief overview of what Looker is about. So this plastic surgeon named Dr. Larry Roberts, played by Albert Finney, has been performing this series of like very minor altercations on a group of models who are seeking perfection. Literally, it's like, I want my eyebrow raised 1 millimeter. I want my lips less full by this much volume. I want my ear to like move in this direction. And he's kind of like, I don't want to do this. These women are already beautiful, but he knows that someone's going to botch them because he's the greatest around. So he does them anyway. And all these operations are a success, but someone starts to kill his patients and he wants to figure out why. So he becomes suspicious and starts his own investigation. And he uncovers like the craziest advertising AI enemy that I've seen in a movie. And I'm starting to feel like this is not science fiction, it is science fact.
He was prophetic with this movie. I mean, not only did he sort of predict CG, but he sort of predicted AI. I mean, it has AI generated people acting in commercials in this movie. It's the very definition of high concept, I think, but now it is real. Like, and we're facing very real like legal ramifications of companies like using people's likenesses without their permission through AI. And I actually think you mentioned like, oh, maybe this fell through the cracks back then, but would it be appreciated better now? I think yes, absolutely, in the sense that it kind of reminded me of The Substance. And if
That's
you
exactly
loved
what I thought. That's exactly what I thought, Matt.
The Substance, you're probably going to really love this movie, where in which there is sort of a program that people can sort of profit off of, but it's doing something to you that you're not aware of. That's actually much more insidious. And yeah,
Also, at the time, the fact that Albert Finney was in this movie, I mean, that kind of meant a lot. Like Albert Finney was this kind of great actor, and for him to do this kind of genre movie, I think that didn't land it so well because basically it's a plastic surgeon is your kind of an aging middle-aged plastic surgeon is your lead, is your
Yeah, it's not
star,
like
he's your
you have
hero.
like
He's not the
Charlton
normal
Heston.
hero.
It's not like you have like a Chuck Heston or like a James Caan or someone playing this. Like you have like a Shakespearean actor.
Yeah, I mean this, and so I don't know that was I think a component that kind of just felt weird with audiences at the time, but for me, I thought it was like this movie is amazing, and with Susan Day, who is just absolutely stunning in the film.
Oh,
It was
she's
like
so
kind of a
charismatic.
revelation. I hadn't even thought about her since Partridge Family, and she's like was fantastic in this.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the second billing on this double billing, which is Coma, which is one of my favorite, maybe my second favorite, because Cafe Express just edges it out barely. But it's one of my favorite titles that we had the chance to cover on season one. I feel so passionate about every single part of this movie, including that chase sequence that Quentin and I
Yeah, that you've
disagree
been
on.
willing to go toe to toe with Quentin over this. You've been willing to lock horns and "Arr!" you two are like coma, no coma.
But I love this movie. Kind of like a poignant, fun flick about a woman and her femininity and what it means to be in a man's world and who can you trust and the thing about the kidney.
Well,
And you can
what's interesting
hear,
that both movies are actually that. If you think
yeah,
about
they
it,
are. They're actually about like what it is like to be in a man's world.
yeah, you just described
Crichton,
both films.
oh, I
Yeah,
have such a crush on Crichton. I have such a crush on him. I know he's dead, but I love you,
he
Crichton.
was dating one of the Playboy models in Looker at the time that he made Looker.
he dated everybody. He dated like a neighbor of mine. He dated
Just
everyone.
like Bud Buttiker, who just like dated everyone and married everyone.
Prolific, powerful
Yeah,
man.
they were
These
players.
prolific, powerful. They should have loved their wives. That's all I can say. But I love Coma, and if you want to hear Quentin, Roger, and myself discuss Coma, you can do so on episode 6 of the Video Archives podcast. It also played. It's one of our most popular episodes because it also played with Mikey and Nikki and Piranha, which I just thought was like the perfect episode. I love it. It's one of my favorite that we've done besides The Great Waldo Pepper, which is just my favorite episode of all time.
The Coma
Anyway,
episode's great.
the Coma
The,
episode's great. And the
the
after
whole,
show is
all
great.
the movies discussed on that episode
And the
it was a
after show
really
is
fun
great
episode to
because
do.
I actually went and I started reading the book to hear, and the book is vastly different from the movie because Robin Cook wrote the book and Michael Crichton adapted it. So he put his own flair and twist on it. I like it. Books and movies can be two completely different things. I think that's how it should be sometimes because you can enjoy both. But yeah, if you want to hear it, go ahead and check out that episode. And as Matt mentioned, this movie is already sold out.
But there is always standby at the door. So these are definitely worth checking out. And I highly recommend that you do the standby because there's always no shows and there's always a few extra seats that I can add in. And I promise you that if you go see those movies, you will come out of them with songs from Looker stuck in your head. I love the She's a Looker with a Beautiful. She's a Looker with a Beautiful Face, always on display, that opening song. And then I love that like music that kind of plays throughout that like bup, 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 bup.
Yeah,
It's almost like
it feels like Halloween.
popcorn.
I also don't know how to describe it, but also like Looker feels like Halloween 3 to me in a certain weird way.
Yeah, because it's
Uh,
like techie.
yeah, it's like
Uh,
techie, and then you kind of have like these kind of like men that are like
Yeah.
in these
Also,
roles that like
the style of the productions are not too dissimilar. They're Hollywood productions,
Oh,
both
the
made in.
climactic set piece with the like moving sets with like the video cameras on the matrix grid. It's so cool. And then you have like Albert Finney like coming in as this like action hero. I totally see the like
it's
Tom
awesome.
Atkins
Yeah, the
parallel there.
connection. But yeah, as Matt said, these are sold out. So if you want, head on over to the standby line. We always try to get people into the theater. There are sometimes no shows, so there is a chance.
Are the
And
junior mints frozen?
They can be.
That's this week at the Video Archive Cinema Club. Matt and I will see you next week where we wrap up January and head on in to the month of love, February. Remember, guys, patrons get this episode one day early for free over at patreon.com/videoarchives. Plus, we have a weekly newsletter that comes out on Mondays with pictures of all the boxes and any memorabilia that is going to be at the screenings in case you can't go. And we're also doing features on last week's movies and like last week's showings. So if you show up there, you might get featured in the newsletter. If you'd like to get your tickets to any of these shows, you can do so at
VistaTheaterHollywood.com.
And as always, follow the Cinema Club on Instagram at
Video Archives Club
for updates on showtimes and formats. Okay, guys, see you next week.
Signing off.
Bye.
This calendar episode was produced by the Video Archives podcast and hosted by Gala Avary and Matt Landsman. Find even more of Video Archives on our Patreon, patreon.com/videoarchives. Copyright 2025, all rights reserved.